Good afternoon. This is Dr. Terry James Gingrass, and you're watching Dr. G's ADHD Room, a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. Uh, I am a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist, and I've been working with ADHD for around 40 years, actually. And I started all this because I have a child with ADHD, born back in the time, well, actually, there wasn't any such thing as ADHD. It been hadn't been named yet. Let's put it that way. The best they could come up with was hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. Okay, which was paid. Cool. Anyway, the deal was they thought you'd outgrow it, and they thought the major characteristic was the hyperactivity, and they were wrong on both counts. So it wasn't until 1980 they came out with the ADD, and then in 1987 they changed it to ADHD for God knows what reason, but just a well, thank you. I have a fan here. I appreciate it. Uh, anyway, the deal was that it was, and we're talking 1987 was the first time we had ADHD. And since then, we've gotten a lot better about getting information and stuff. But back then, nobody knew anything about this stuff. I mean, literally nobody knew. I was a psychologist back then. And when I started seeing something about my young man that I wasn't exactly sure what was going on, I had friends who were, had gone to big name postdoctoral programs in pediatrics. That means they studied extra after they got their PhDs so they could work with kids. Anyway, and they sort of threw up their hands. Nothing wrong with him, I don't think. Anyway. So ADHD is still kind of one of those bugaboos. I am down here in Virginia, and we have tons of people who, I don't believe in that stuff, kind of attitude towards it, in spite of the fact that probably they came close to flunking out of high school because they got it themselves. But that's a whole different thing. I want to talk about ADHDers, although ADHD can cause you a lot of troubles, especially in the conventional school system. But when you get out in the world, a lot of times some of the characteristics, at least, of ADHD make you a desirable employee. As a matter of fact, probably about 70% of all the people who are entrepreneurs have ADHD. I know because I hang around with these people. But so the problem you have is that as a parent, you're constantly having to enforce rules that suppress a lot of the natural instincts that an ADHDer is, and a lot of the natural strengths they have. Because you're supposed to be quiet, do your work, get it turned in on time, take good notes, take the tests, do well on the tests, all that stuff, which suppresses a lot of their natural abilities. Okay. And just thought I'd give you a little quickie list of the kind of things you should be encouraging, okay, and not suppressing, in spite of what the school system says, okay? I mean, the big ones and the ones that make them good employees or desirable employees, they tend to be creative. An ADHDer doesn't have to be just art, but they are creative in that they look at the world in a slightly different way. So if you have problems, they can come up with some pretty unique solutions to the problem that more conventional thinkers just won't get. Because you've got to understand that neurotypical brains, neurotypical folks are good at maintaining what's already been done. Okay? They're the sustainers. They keep the system going. But when it comes to creative, outside the box thinking, let's try a whole new different way, not so much. Okay. So that's where your ADHDer steps in. As most of you know, they do different things that you never would have thought of. My son used to be able to take 2 paper clips, a couple of rubber bands, and a button, and make all sorts of interesting stuff that I just never would have considered. I mean, and it's one of those things that you should encourage. Okay, and it doesn't have to be art, although it can be. I have some family history of ADHD, and they tend to be artists, metal sculptors, and that sort of thing. And my son is a jewelry designer. He makes his own stuff. You know, he gets up there and grinds away at I don't know what. When he visits, he takes over my bonus room, and when he's not hanging with the family, he's making stuff. You know, and he does a lot of investment casting, which means he makes these wax models of what he's building or what he wants to have, and then sends it to someplace else, and they work with it and make him a metal, sometimes silver, sometimes gold. Model of what he carved. Kind of interesting, but you know, I wouldn't discourage artistic stuff, but it wasn't like I was, you know, continually making new stuff. And, you know, probably my greatest ability, if you will, is that I can process a whole bunch of information real fast. I had to learn to do that because when I was a kid, we shifted schools a lot, and I had to always catch up to wherever I was going. Anyway, so creativity. That's one of the things that is important in a well-run business. Other things include high energy. Yeah, you know, ADHDers have high energy. Well, sometimes it's a good thing, you know. They also like to multitask, okay? And they're good at multitasking. They're not so good at finishing all the time, so you need to have somebody with them, working with them, who compensates for that by being a good finisher. But you know, they like the stimulation. The ADHDers, they like the stimulation, but when it gets to the actual finishing it up, you know, when it's just details and double checking and all that stuff, they get real bored, and they don't like that very much. So they also ADHDers tend to thrive under pressure. You look at the way, you know, look at them in school. They better thrive under pressure, or terrible things are going to happen. They also tend to be risk takers. I remember I said about 70% of all entrepreneurs are ADHD. They take risks a lot. Sometimes it works out great, and sometimes it bankrupts the company. But if you look at the history, the biography of any of our entrepreneurs who are terribly successful right now, they had big time failures. You know, 3 or 4 bankruptcies, and you know, just losing everything and having to start all over again. But they thrive on that, and they love the adrenaline rush of taking a risk. And sometimes you need some balance. If you have a company, you don't want everybody in there to be yes men, you know, that just agree with whatever you say. So you want some people who look at things differently. It balances the approach of the company to all sorts of different things. And I've mentioned before already is that they are problem solvers. They solve problems from a slightly different point of view, from outside the box. They are not just neurotypical thinkers. They look at stuff and they can think of all sorts of different interesting ways of solving the problem that you might, you know, a lot of people would never have thought of. I mean, in your child, you'll see this when they ask you these questions that, huh? Where did that come from? I remember my youngest asking me once, Dad, if toenails are smaller than fingernails, why are toenail clippers bigger than fingernail clippers? Got no clue. Sorry. Wrong question. But they do stuff like that. And that way of looking at things and of asking questions, that you need to encourage that, because that goes on later in life and becomes a way of solving problems that's a little different and therefore valuable from the typical way of solving problems. So, and there are, of course, other characteristics that are important that you should be encouraging, but just don't push on them so hard that they're not able to spring back. Let's just put it that way. And there's a tendency to want to do that. It's embarrassing being called by the principal all the time at their school. It's embarrassing when the teacher's calling. It's but this is not about you. Okay, you're trying to raise this kid, and it's a genetic disorder, so you probably had some kind of a hand in passing it on. So, but remember, encourage creativity, thinking about things in unusual ways, doing stuff that gets you a little excited every once in a while, taking some risks, And if you haven't done that in a while, you got to consider it. You haven't been afraid in a while, you're probably not living up to your potential. That's probably a different topic for maybe another time. Okay, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingrass. This has been Dr. G's ADHD Room. This is a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers, because believe it or not, we need ADHDers. We need people who think outside the box. They're the ones who are going to solve the unusual problems. Okay, we will catch you next time. See you then. Oh, one more thing, quickly. I'm thinking about doing some different things. I'm thinking about starting a course, and I'm thinking about starting a kind of a group support thing that would meet like weekly for, well, who knows, forever. Would you kind of let me know if either one of those is appealing to you? I'll just mark it down here at the bottom somewhere. Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that.